Hi, this is Ray Bertoldi, and you're listening to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Senator. My name is Thomas. I'm a first year at the policy school. My question is about
And also in the service.
Yes, sir. But I was wondering about the authorization for use of military force that all of our troops around the world who are deployed right now are under the authority of this AUMF that was passed after 9/11. I was wondering why it has been so hard for a new AUMF to be passed.
Because no politician wants to go on the record voting to authorize the use of military force in case something bad happens, and then they're held accountable for having voted yes or no, such as on the Iraq War. It's cowardly. We need to do our jobs. We need to have a discussion on the authorization for use of military force.
We are 17 and a half years into the war in Afghanistan. That war was authorized shortly after September 11, 2001, and has not been re-examined by Congress since then. To me, that is the biggest fundamental failure of our American democracy since South Carolina seceded from the Union.
What we have now, since 9/11, is a recognized threat by our intelligence community that is worldwide and nobody wears a uniform. So how do you square that with an authorization of use of military force? I mean, if this were simple, it would have been updated by now. The reason it hasn't been updated by now is nobody can figure out how to do it.
What is disturbing to us is, are our elected representatives taking their oversight of the military seriously? I don't know if the mass of Americans have ever taken that responsibility seriously, but once upon a time our congresspeople did.
Hello and welcome back to Thank You for Your Service, a hard look at American civil military affairs from the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. I'm Thomas Krasnation.
And I'm Nick Pereso. Today we're bringing you an interview we did with Dr. Charles A. Stevenson about congressional oversight of the military. Dr. Stevenson is a professor of American foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. And prior to that, he was a professor at the National War College. Before teaching, Dr. Stevenson served for over 20 years as a Senate staffer, working on foreign affairs and defense policy. He has written several books on the subject, including Congress at War, The Politics of Conflict Since 1789.
This interview will go into more depth on topics we've covered in previous episodes, like congressional oversight of military spending and the authorization for use of military force. The AUMF is of particular interest to a lot of people right now, and it's come up several times in the last few episodes. We even recently got to ask Senator Tammy Duckworth about it at a public event here at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, as you heard in the opening clip.
But first, we talked about the history of the relationship between Congress and the military. And sorry if the audio quality is spotty here and there, we had some technical difficulties while recording. But without further delay, here's the interview. Dr. Stevenson, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy to do it.
So we've had a lot of guests on our podcast already make comments about the role of Congress in oversight of the military, and specifically how the trend of that relationship over time has been such that that Congress has gradually given up a lot of the authority that it used to exercise over the military. We're wondering if you agree with that analysis, and if so, or if not, what do you make of it?
Well, I agree that Congress has largely abdicated its war power, which is very important. It hasn't abdicated its micromanagement of the Defense Department, though, because it does have those constitutional rights to raise and support an army, provide and maintain a navy, set rules for the forces, and that it continues to do. In fact, it's been very generous. Congress is both a sponsor and a sometime critic of the military. And at different points in time, with different news issues being current, it switches, or it seems to switch, to do more one than the other.
And so what do you make of the relationship today, then?
Today, I think Congress is enormously supportive of most things that the U.S. military does. It's giving very generous pay increases to people in uniform, and this administration wants to deny them to people who don't wear uniforms but work in the federal government. I think that's wrong. But the Congress has always been willing, so even before the 9/11 attacks, to give the military extra pay raises in the year that it didn't do the same for civilian authorities in the government.
Pay raises aside, I think there's a lot of criticism regarding how the military budgeting process works. So we spoke with Senator McCaskill a while ago, and she spoke about how, with projects like the F-35, the military-industrial complex, these companies are placing the building structures in like 25 different states. So they always have the support of Congress around that. So do you agree that with pay raises aside, there is some dysfunction in regard to how military budgeting works?
Well, the big problem with military budgeting is the problem with civilian budgeting as well. We have a congressional dysfunction on passing an annual budget on time. And that's a fight because mostly Republicans want to remove the caps that Congress has put in ever since 1990 on both domestic and military spending, wants to remove them only for the military. And Democrats and others say, well, no, we've got to lift caps for both. And that's been the basic fight. Now, what the Senator McCaskill said about contractors is true. I can't think of any major weapons program, certainly no aircraft program in the last 40 years that hasn't had subcontracts in over 40 states. That's the way the military-industrial complex thinks, works, and profits.
So we asked the same question to Senator McCaskill too, but do you think that there are policy steps that need to be taken to remediate that, or is that just an accepted fact of the way it is?
I don't think you can change the parochialism of members of Congress that's built into our constitutional system. Every member of Congress represents a piece of territory and therefore the voters within that territory. And if they don't take care of those voters, they get voted out. So you can't avoid parochialism. What you can do is structure debates and consideration of military measures, including contracting, weapons procurement, so that the other sides get heard, the cost effectiveness side, the military judgment on the need for things, those kinds of factors have to be part of the debate. And if they are, then I'm willing to trust the constitutional officers to sort out the disagreements.
So looking back again kind of at the history of congressional oversight, and you said that it's clear that Congress has abdicated a lot of its war powers. Do you see a time in our history that was like a turning point for that, where that kind of happened?
Was there a golden age? Offhand, I can't think of one. The very first investigation that Congress held, 1792, was of a failed military intervention in the Northwest Territory by General Sinclair. Congress always looks into problems, to failures. During the War of 1812, they had extensive hearings. During the Civil War, there was the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, which actually I think behaved pretty well, though President Lincoln didn't like how many questions it asked. But they met in secret, and they delayed their reports for many months, so it didn't jeopardize ongoing military operations. But they still looked closely at how things were happening. Same thing the Spanish-American War. Congress discovered what the poor provisioning of troops, they called it embalmed beef. And they looked into the whole furnishing of troops. They went to Cuba wearing woolen uniforms, all that kind of stuff. Congress has played a useful role in most of our wars. It certainly did in World War II too, but where it continues to investigate problems and failures. Congress likes short, successful wars, and whenever a conflict becomes prolonged or appears to be unsuccessful, they get all upset. Trouble is, we face a couple of forever wars right now, and Congress seems unwilling to say, stay in, go strong, get out, or what? In other words, they are abdicating what should be their role to say, what should we do about these major operations?
On that note about forever wars, So Senator McCaskill has said that the authorization for the use of military force is just too complicated to renegotiate it correctly. But on the other hand, people like Senator Duckworth have said that it's cowardly for members of Congress to not step up and renegotiate it. Why do you think, as an observer, it has not been renegotiated?
Well, it hasn't because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, it is very difficult. How do we want to craft our involvement in some of these messy conflicts? Syria, are we with the Kurds, but not Assad? We're against ISIS. Where do we want? How do we sort out all of those cross pressures that we see there? That's complicated. But the deeper reason is that congressmen are now risk averse. You don't remember it, but I do, that several of the contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1992 were ruled unacceptable because they had opposed the Gulf War, which was short and successful. In fact, 47 Democrats voted against going into the Gulf War because Senator Nunn of Georgia, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, said it was too risky, it wasn't properly planned. Okay, 2008, the flip happened when a lot of folks were denied the chance to challenge Barack Obama. He won. He had opposed the Iraq War, and they, in a moment of caution, I suppose, had all supported going into Iraq. So members of Congress learned, okay, people have been hurt in the past by their votes on war, so we better not take any more.
And I guess returning to that question of, is there a policy solution to that? Is there, or is it just like the parochial issue that that's just the nature of the system?
Well, I think they should Congress should approve our involvement against ISIS, should approve our, I don't know, I'm undecided on Yemen. They should at least vote how much, how long, how far. Congress historically has set limits in the size, the duration, the types of forces being sent abroad. I think they should re-examine those issues for Yemen, for Syria, and for any Venezuela, if the administration wants to go there. They should decide those questions, and they're not easy. But another trouble with the Congress, and what my solution would be for doing things different, is what Senator McCain talked about in his final major public speech: regular order. That's what his Armed Services Committee does every year. They pass a bill that gets signed by the president every year since 1961. And they do it. They do it because they feel they have to, and therefore they make compromises to be sure the bill gets passed. And if it's vetoed, gets amended slightly so it'll be signed. That's the regular order. Too often nowadays, members of Congress avoid difficult votes. They punt the issues, and therefore nothing gets decided. If they would spend more time voting instead of campaigning and sorting out, and not being so afraid that a single vote they make is going to ruin their career, well, tough. Their job is to make those decisions. And that's what I think the greatest reform is, if more people would agree to follow the regular order and follow the model that the Armed Services Committees have set for over 50 years.
Supposing that it just never gets renegotiated, that Congress members remain too afraid of votes or, risk, and it never another one never gets passed or renewed. What does that mean for the future of American foreign policy?
Well, it means we are adding another layer of dysfunction on some of the ones we already have, and another problem. I think it would be very bad. That may well be the most likely outcome, but it's certainly not one that I would recommend. I think we've got to get our act together in a whole range of international policy issues. We've been ducking World Trade Organization reform. We've been ducking IMF reform. We've been ducking maybe changes in the way the UN system works. We've been ducking a lot. By the way, Congress has also ducked the foreign aid program. We have not had a major